Welcome to Section 3, Survey Management and Field Methods. My name is Jennifer Sturdy. I am with the Center for Effective Global Action here at UC Berkeley, and I am the Berkeley Initiative for Transparency in the Social Sciences Director. We're now coming to Section 3, Survey Management and Field Methods. We have a few modules to cover: questionnaire design, field organization, quality control and data management, and transparency and reproducibility. Of course, something very near and dear to my heart. And a few things to keep in mind as we are transitioning from learning about impact evaluation methods and some of the more technical aspects of study design, such as sampling and power calculations, and moving into field methods and questionnaire design. So sampling, of course, has a reputation for being complex, in particular power calculations. There is underlying theory and formulas that inform power calculations. And especially ex post, we can tell if it was done correctly, whether or not the formulas were followed, and certainly whether or not we inserted appropriate assumptions and data into those formulas. Now, usually, power calculations are conducted by few actors, and sometimes only one. There is a need to engage with other actors sometimes and learn whether or not your assumptions that you have put into the formulas were correct. So working with project design teams to determine whether or not your assumptions around minimal detectable effects are close, or at least guided by actual experience. So while few actors are typically involved and power calculations and sampling are usually left to specialists, just like any aspect of study design, it's really useful to bring in other actors when possible to help inform your assumptions around those activities. Now, in comparison to sampling and power calculations, questionnaire design is typically thought of as an easier task, especially when compared to sampling and power calculations. While there's no specific theory underlying survey design and questionnaire design, there's certainly decades of experience that do inform what is a good questionnaire versus a poorly written questionnaire, whether it goes to how questions are worded and appropriate skip patterns and ordering and sequencing of questionnaire modules. And we can't always tell if it's done right, at least ex ante. We won't know until we go into the field, we pre-test, we learn about how to word questions appropriately, and go into the field and have the full-scale study and the final data product. It's not until that stage where we may be able to know, did we have an appropriately designed questionnaire in place. Questionnaire design is an iterative process, preferably with as many actors, whether it's the principal investigator and a questionnaire design expert on the study team, but also involving project design team members, project leaders, government counterparts, any potential users of the data should also be involved in the questionnaire design process in order to hopefully maximize its usefulness and ensure the questionnaire is asking the questions that we want asked and want to study in the evaluation. There are 3 phases of questionnaire design. Number 1 is defining the content. So of course, what needs to be measured. 2 is drafting the questionnaire. So how are we going to measure what we need to? And 3 is pre-testing. So did we get it right? Does the questionnaire work as it's currently designed? So in phase 1, defining the content, there's a few questions we want to ask ourselves. First, what are the expected effects of the intervention? Are we studying a project that is intending to reduce malnutrition, increase knowledge, or improve water quality? We need to ask, in what entities can these effects be observed? So do we need to study and sample children, teachers, or water sources? Do we need to correlate the effects with other factors? So for example, will we also need to look at varying treatment levels? Do we need to look at income? Do we need to look at weather patterns? Which explicit indicators can we use to measure the effects and other factors? So again, getting into definition, do we need to measure child's height, standardized test scores, specific regions, seasons, etc.? And what other considerations are imposed by the survey's mechanics? So this means specifically thinking about, do we need to record identifiers, survey conditions, respondent IDs, and fieldworker IDs? Do we think that these mechanics of survey implementation may need to be recorded as they may relate to survey quality? The process involves several stages, of course, extensive discussions with the project implementation team, the impact evaluation team, and survey experts, like questionnaire design experts. I would also add to that other potential users of the data. So if this is a government project that is being evaluating, engaging with government counterparts to ensure that the questionnaire is designed in a way to inform their future decisions. This also requires a review of the literature, and also reviewing and bringing together other questionnaires, certainly for comparability, and to learn what worked and what didn't in other studies that may inform your questionnaire and your study. Drawing from qualitative studies, and certainly because of this very interactive process, you really must have a leader on the evaluation team who's capable of coordinating across all of these various actors and bringing them together, and consolidating the information that comes out of these extensive discussions into a final product, which of course is no small task. The end product is of course a list of questions that should then inform your questionnaire design. Phase 2 is drafting the questionnaire. This is where drawing from existing questionnaires and learning what worked and what didn't in other studies really helps with formulating the correct wording for certain questions. Organizing, so how to group the questions into questionnaire modules. Formatting, which really refers to the physical appearance of the questionnaire, which may seem like a very basic element, but when you put yourself in the place of an interviewer who is in the field and working on several interviews a day, the formatting really does matter, and it's certainly linked to the interviewer's ability to follow the questionnaire along in the field and hopefully reduce entry error. And finally, other issues. So recording consumption, translation, back translation, and review of that is certainly a big task of drafting the questionnaire. Considering if you're going to use any software for field-based data entry, and how that is incorporated into drafting the questionnaire, and thinking about who is the main coordinator, who is responsible for really coordinating the drafting of the questionnaire. So wording, keep it simple, avoid academic language that could be incomprehensible to the respondent. Keep in mind, again, your interviewer and your respondent's capabilities. So for example, complex language would be something like, what is the source of energy most frequently used by the members of this household for the preparation of meals? A much simpler version of that would be, what fuel do you use for cooking? So keep in mind, again, how to reduce burden on your respondent to understand what is being asked of him or her. Cultural context, of course, is also very important. So we need to understand what's reliable and valid in one cultural context, and that may not be the same in another context. Certain words mean different things to different people. So for example, asking, do you own a car? There's a lot of different ways to interpret that question. When we say you, do we mean the individual or the household that they reside in? When we say own, do we mean that they fully own it or they have a loan and they're paying back a loan? And car, what do we mean by car? Does this mean a pickup truck or a tractor or a small motorbike? There could be different ideas for what car means in this context. So again, keep the wording simple and hopefully pre-test to make sure we get it right. And also remember, in wording, we want to be unambiguous with our questions. So avoid ambiguous wording. For example, if you ask a question, when did you move into this dwelling? There are a lot of possible answers to this, or ways to answer it. The respondent could say in 1999, so the actual date. They could respond 10 years ago, which of course is just the quantity. After I finished school, so in relation to a particular event, in the summer, or when we bought it. It's a lot clearer for us to ask, in what year did your household move into this dwelling? We're basically directing the respondent how we want the question answered. When necessary, in order to reduce ambiguity, we should use explicit reference periods and units of measurement. So for example, it's a little difficult to respond to the question, how much wine do you consume? So with this question, do we mean per month, per week, yesterday? So what is our reference period? And should the respondent respond in terms of bottles or glasses or ounces? So what is the unit of measurement that the respondent is expected to respond in? A clearer way to ask this question is, how many glasses of wine did you drink in the past week? Finally, there's a few issues to keep in mind that we should avoid when designing our questionnaires. First, avoid introducing leading questions. So asking a question like, how much did you like going to school? A lot, a little, or not that much? That's a leading question because it assumes that the respondent liked going to school. Second, avoid double negatives. And third, avoid double-barreled questions. More information on that can be found in the study guide. The next stage of drafting our questionnaire is, of course, organizing it. So first we need to consider the nature of the statistical entities that we will be collecting information on. Are we collecting information on households, on individual household members, on their farms, their crops, their fields, non-consumption items, or other statistical entities? Who should answer the questions? So if we are collecting information on individual household members' health activities, can we interview a proxy, so one household member who can respond on behalf of all of the individuals? Or do we need to interview all of the household individuals themselves directly? So understanding when and if a proxy is allowed and if that should be recorded should be considered. In addition, we should think about reference periods. So within and across modules, we should try, to the extent possible, to limit bouncing back and forth between various reference periods. Yesterday, past 7 days, past 3 months, past 12 months. It becomes difficult for a respondent to respond to different questions that bounce across reference periods. We also need to think about the logical order of topics. So do the groupings of modules need to go by health, by education, and by labor? I think another issue to consider here is when you're interviewing a respondent on sensitive data, thinking about when that should be introduced into the survey and where that belongs in the order of the topics is also very important. The third stage of drafting the questionnaire is formatting. And of course, for this, we need to think about the types of questions that are being asked. Are we asking quantitative questions, more qualitative, where there's a categorical response, or typographic, where the response could be alphabetic or textual. We also need to consider if the questionnaire format will be a list or in a grid layout. And for more information on this, please do reference your learning guides. Finally, other issues to consider when you're drafting the questionnaire. If you do need to record consumption for your study, keep in mind it is not easy, it is not quick, and it is not cheap to collect consumption data. But however, it may be necessary for your study. There are two methods for this, diary and recall. And I highly recommend you reference your learning guide for more information on this. There's a lot of work that's being conducted in learning how to record consumption better and more efficiently in the field, and it's great to learn from the work that's being done out there. Paneling, so if you do require for your study following the same households or the same individuals over time, it certainly is necessary to record and enter as much tracking information as possible. So GPS coordinates, individual phone numbers, information on relatives and neighbors, so that if that household does move over the course of your study period, you are able to hopefully track them over time. Translation, also like consumption, it's not easy, it's not quick, and it's not cheap, but in many cases it's very necessary. So keep in mind that as you develop your source file, perhaps in English, when you do require translation, it's very important to also have it back translated, preferably by a translator who is separate from the original translation team. So if you are translating from English into Spanish, in many cases it is very useful to also pay for a back translation from the Spanish to English so that you can compare the two English versions and make sure that no nuance in questionnaire language and wording has been lost in the translation. In addition, something to consider is software, what software you are using for building and formatting your questionnaire. It certainly is the experience of many experts that Excel is better and more useful than Word. But really do your homework and learn about what software is out there and is more appropriate for your study in order to maximize and improve the formatting and the quality of the questionnaire you're designing. Also think about who should draft the questionnaire. Again, this gets back to kind of necessary expertise and knowing that wording of questionnaires, skip patterns in questionnaires, ordering of modules, all of this really is built on a lot of experience and decades worth of survey work where many study teams have learned or some order and some skip patterns don't work. And so certainly learn from and engage with experts in survey design when thinking about who to draft your questionnaire. The final phase of questionnaire design is, of course, pre-testing. This involves the impact evaluation team, survey experts, and the survey firm that has been contracted to conduct the data collection. It should be iterative. Problems are expected to occur, and hopefully most of them will be identified in the first day or two. The sample for the pretest does not need to be random, big, or diverse. It really just needs to be as similar as possible to our study population in order to maximize the learning and identification of problems in the field with questionnaire design issues. This pretest will typically overestimate the interview time as really these problems arise and the interview team learns how to navigate the survey itself. And pretesting is not to be confused with field testing and training practice, which is really a critical stage within the training with the survey firm before the large-scale study is actually implemented itself. So with that, we conclude Module 1 of Section 3, Field Methods, and we'll move on to Module 2 next.